lines up, everything, and I'm not going to give you any warnings because I didn't understand any of it. I'm not on the list of 10.
Well, excuse my deficient pronunciation of words. I come from South Georgia, and we're backwards in more than one way. So all these French words and the various highlighted words, I'm probably not going to pronunciate effectively or even efficiently, but nevertheless, I will proceed with that caveat. Very well. I will begin by noting that evolutionary biology is the sine qua non, ultimate explanation for all of reality, it seems, in the postmodern or contemporary context. In order, therefore, to gain traction within the academy, broadly speaking, today, my dissertation will have an extended or deep dialogue with evolutionary biology. Now, that brings up a question here. Ingolf asked me this very succinctly. Why would a religious person care? Why? Why would anybody care at all? Well, so in the introduction here, which is largely a response to Ingolf and his criticisms of me, and he's finally signed off on it, so I'm on the right track. So I was able to substantiate.
Before we go on, what you sent out is the latest, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. I mean, I'm sort of ad-libbing a little bit here because I don't want it to be a straight. Right. I don't want to be a straight lecture, right? But I am Bradford, indeed I am. So you're right. But so why would a religious person care if there's traction between the evolutionary sciences or biology and divine involvement, which is my terminology for divine action? And you'll find out later if you haven't read it before, and if you have, this will be a reminder. I detest the language of divine action. So that's one reason why I'm making up these words and making up these reference with a T the way that I am. Divine action is a losing game, But nevertheless, why would a religious person care if there's traction between evolutionary biology and divine involvement or activity, or even with religion for that matter? Is not religion or theology a different language game than is evolutionary sciences and biology in particular? Cross-reference Wittgenstein. Emphatically, I say no wise is this the case. Rather, in this dissertation, I will in part propound and establish why this extended case study with evolutionary biology is important. I will do so through developing traction between evolutionary biology and theological divine activity through uncontrolling a more potent love. And I will establish why this more potent love is vital for this conversation, essential. I note that I prefer the terminology of divine involvement or activity over and above divine action, in part because action seemingly connotes specific instantiations, whereas activity is more conducive to a view of active or involvement, activity or involvement over the course of one's life, if I may transfer such a concept to God, if you follow my thinking there at all. Activity is more nebulous, whereas action is specific, concrete, and refers to specific instantiations of some sort of activity. Indeed. So then, I'm avoiding the terminology of action language because I deem it true that action refers to particular instances, whereas involvement and activity are more nebulous in their reference. Now, I do contend that this is indeed a critical topic, one that is intrinsically related to the applicability and plausibility of theology in the 21st century contemporary context, especially with their theological view of divine activity through a more potent love. A more potent love. That is a portmanteau that I've created. Did I say that right? Portmanteau. Very well. Of amore, which is of course one of the Italian words for love, and potent, which is, of course, an English word without the omni in front of it. But we all understand what that means. So I'm talking about potent love, or love potencies here, more potent love. Indeed, evolutionary biology, for all intents and purposes, my friends, is one of, if not the major obstacles to a faith-based worldview in the contemporary context. This is because evolutionary biology has assumed the definitive position of explanation in the modern context, in the world of today, that is, for the world today. No longer are all things seen through the context of faith. Rather, atheistic viewpoints predominate in the academy today. So then, for us who are faith endowed, it's incumbent upon us to proverbially bridge the gap between evolutionary biology, or science, and the theology of divine activity, or involvement, the way I've termed it earlier, based upon a more potent love in the contemporary environment. Herein, indeed, I will address how a more potent love works with and within a radically contingentist, which is another word that I've created, evolutionary theory and worldview. I've coined the word contingentist to refer to people in philosophy, particularly philosophy of science, and even more particular philosophy of biology, who stress contingency in their personal philosophy of bios, or life, to use the Greek term. No longer are all things seen, as I said, through the context of faith. I will reach, therefore, a via media between a somewhat radical formalist position, such as that presented by Simon Conway Morris and Michael J. Denton, and a veritably radical contingent position of Stephen Jay Gould. Thereby, I will address such questions as, how do I think of the possibility space, quote unquote, raised by Conway Morris? How is the love of God understood as purposeful? How do I differentiate between purposiveness and simply random outcomes? What is the connection between openness and novelty to the concept of order? And is there a differentiation between the more potent love of God and contingency? And if so, what is it? I'm going to be addressing this herein. In fact, the aforementioned questions all lead to the larger question: what are the things that God values in the creative process? What is it that God is aiming for? Anything? Can we know of it? Admittedly, my biological training and experience provokes within me a more sympathetic position that lands nearer to Gould than Conway Morris or Denton. While Conway Morris and Denton are more Neoplatonic in their orientation, I take a more functionalist or Aristotelian stance toward these questions. But this admission still leaves open the questions of, how do I define God's action in such a world? How is it different from contingency? Or from what I label contingentist instances? Why do we need the God idea at all? Question.
Do you answer that?
I will do so.
Okay.
I will do so. This prospectus is necessarily so a prospectus. It's a perspectival prospectus of what I'm going to do, not necessarily all the answers that I've come to. Does that make sense?
Yeah, is it okay if I jump in there?
Sure. Ask a question.
What you do?
So she doesn't want me to.
Well, okay.
John, I want you to keep presenting.
Okay. Very well.
You can do it. You can be the boss, but that's my
Okay.
preference.
Okay. It's your
We
preference.
don't
So be it.
interrupt each other forever in this group, as you will learn.
Really?
Oh my God.
No. Nevertheless, in the course of this dissertation, I will proverbially adopt and baptize, co-opt, you could say,
Amen.
the contentions of Stephen Jay Gould, and thereafter massage them into a position that is more congenial to a 21st century faith context. I will argue in a very nuanced manner that there could be, and in fact is, some sort of purposiveness at work in a chastened Gouldian position such as that one that I adopt and advocate herein. In so doing, I will delineate how one may distinguish between contingency and veritable divine action. How does one perceive the distinctions between those two? That's what I plan to elucidate. In so doing, I will delineate how one may distinguish between contingency and veritable divine action through the process, or through the teachings and through the writings of one Thomas J. Ord, who notes that God does not insist upon a particular outcome to any event, but God merely allows propensities within matter to work themselves out. God more potently loves the population, that is the filling out, the population, you could say. I'm not speaking here of course, people, but the population in the sense of filling out the natural world in diversity and multiplicity. I contend, in fact, that God populates the world through the filling in of niches, although these niches do not pre-exist, they're filling in. So in that sense, I'm critical of a Neoplatonic viewpoint, which would say that the niches pre-exist the organisms, and the organisms merely grow into the niches.
Wow.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Indeed. Now, I contend instead that they are built within and by the evolutionary process itself. These niches are.
Can I ask, niches, what is niches? Just
Niches are particular, how can I define that? It's sort of self-definitional, but, right.
Well,
A niche,
I know how we use the term niche, like
Right.
niche market, or
Right.
but
well, niches are, they are essential, I guess, functions performed by specific organisms in the environment. That's a niche. For example, the niche of an ant is to be a feeder upon refuse and decomposing material, and they live in the ground. That's their niche. The niche of, say, fungi would be, to decompose organic material in moist environments. That's their niche. That's their particular role in life. Does that make better sense?
yeah, it's kind of like their thing.
That's what their thing. That's what they do exactly. Yeah, good point. Now,
But you're going to have to define that because people. Okay.
okay, very well. Now, I aver that the production of diversity and multiplicity themselves please God, and thereby His intentions for the natural world are fulfilled. In what follows, I will attempt to make a good faith effort at demonstrating the above assertions. Indeed, what then does the contingentist model of divine involvement in the present milieu, that which I will develop herein, contribute to the relationship between evolutionary biology, or science, and a theology of divine involvement, or activity? Statement of the problem. Confidence in cosmic predictability led the French physicist, I'm going to butcher this, Pierre-Simon de Laplace. Do you pronounce the C there? Laplace?
Pierre-Simon de Laplace.
That's it, right. Thank you. Exactly. Right. A century after Newton, that a sufficiently informed intelligence could forecast everything that's going to happen in the world, and working backwards tell you everything that did happen. But the near nature of universal complexity in today's environment shatters such a dream. Indeed it does. And history also includes too much contingency, or the shaping of present results by antecedent states that are random rather than immediate determination, for such a position to be palatable. Now, notably, the 13th century theologian Thomas Aquinas insisted that a proper world formed by God must exhibit some randomity or some randomness in order for it to be perfect. And I affirm such contention because randomness is intrinsic to humans and their autonomy. In this dissertation, in fact, I will argue that ontological randomness is genuine. God, that is the ultimate reality, does not determine the result of every scientifically random event, but instead controls or even constrains, you could say, randomness by setting broad boundaries, such as the range of possible outcomes by which a random event may occur, as well as the probability of each outcome. God then allows particles, systems, and organisms to interact in their own ways, according to natural laws, within these expansive boundaries, producing thereby a wide range of beautiful and complex results. So then, we live, friends, in a world of contingency and randomness. Of chance, you could say, and randomness. I'm using the term contingency here and randomness all in a circular manner to refer essentially to the same thing. This dissertation, however, looks at how through paleontological examination, randomness shapes the world from the bottom up. But how much is truly random? The phenomenon known as convergence theory, which this dissertation also explicates, indicates that evolution through natural selection may be random. It may in fact be random, or it may proceed along various paths. However, the destinations are few. So then, there's a definite dichotomy. Randomness is constrained within pattern, and those two are going to be held in tension with one another. But I tend to come more so upon the side of chance and randomness, or what I refer to as randomity. In order to understand the events and generalities of life's pathway, we must look beyond principles of evolutionary theory to a paleontological examination of the contingent pattern of life's history on our planet, which is, by the way, the single actualized version among millions of possible alternatives that did not occur. Such a view of the history of life is highly contrary to most Western mindsets, because Western mindsets are generally more deterministic in their thinking. It's also contrary to the deepest social traditions of Western philosophy and culture, for history culminating in humanity as its most potent or its most magnificent exhibit. It's contrary to that. In his magnum opus, The Structure of Evolutionary Theory, Gould emphasizes the importance of recognizing both the reality of structural constraint and the notion that structures have historical origins. He essentially douses one, you could say, heavily in functional adaptationist viewpoints and historical contingencies, while nevertheless giving strokes of formalism. In so doing, Gould unites insights from both sides of the age-old debate between functionalist and formalist biologists. The functionalists, such as Jean-Baptiste Lamarck and Charles Darwin, typically stress that features of organisms were adaptations to their environments intrinsically. That is, they exist for utilitarian reasons. Whereas formalists such as Etienne Geoffroy Saint-Hilaire and Johann Wolfgang von Goethe.
Goethe. That's a really, really important one.
Goethe?
Goethe.
Goethe.
Very famous guy. You got to say it that way.
Yeah, say it Goethe. John Wolfgang von Goethe. Very well. Stressed the structural unity of type across similar organisms. That is, they were formalists. In essence, a formalist often denied the possibility of evolution because they believed that only superficial change, not fundamental change, was possible. Whereas, of course, the functionalists indicated that superficial as well as fundamental change were both possible. This division between functionalist and formalist biologists was permanently undermined when Darwin showed that structures had evolved through natural selection, although after their emergence, these structures may indeed be constrained by or even further constrain the evolutionary pathways open to them. In doing this, Darwin fundamentally reoriented the functionalist-formalist debate by adding a new dimension, a third dimension, you could say, to the functionalist and to the formalist dichotomy, that is, historical contingencies. Life's pathway certainly includes many features predictable from the laws of nature, but these aspects are far too broad to account for specific instances in the evolutionary process, such as cats, dogs, mushrooms, and people, just to be sort of flippant there. But nevertheless, organisms adapt to and are constrained by physical principles. It is therefore highly unsurprising, I should say, given the universal laws of gravity, that the largest mammal in water, that is whales, would far exceed the largest mammal on land, that is elephants. Three features of the paleontological record stand out in opposition to the conventional view of history of life as broadly predictable, and as of gradually advancing complexity through time. First, the constancy of modal complexity. Second, the concentration of major events in short bursts, interspersed with long periods of stasis, or stability, you could say. And third, the role of external impositions, primarily mass extinctions, in disrupting the normal times of geologic history. These three features, combined with the more general themes of chaos and contingency, require a serious rethinking of the oft-accepting framework, gradualism, for conceptualizing the history of Earth. So then, the problem to be addressed in this dissertation concerns developing a plausible hypothesis of divine involvement or activity in an evolving world for late modern theology. In fleshing this problem out, ladies and gentlemen, I will show the vacuity of four broad conceptions of divine involvement in the world today. That is, first, the incongruity of incompatibilist divine action, or divine activity.
Can I stop you now?
After this paragraph.
Okay.
Second, the barrenness of reductive micro-level divine activity. Third, the hyper-intrusive nature of micro-level particular divine activity. And finally, the sporadic nature of general deistic providential divine activity. Yes, sir.
All right, so it's becoming clear that your project is to map out how divine action works.
And I don't like that language. I don't like
Well,
that.
you don't like divine action. That's another thing that might be good to explain, because that's part of the relationship of the divine with the natural
Well,
world.
I think I've already hit on that a little bit here
Yeah,
because
I'm not asking you to do that now.
Right.
Well, I was just going to ask what you meant by incompatibilist divine activity, like these terms that you're disagreeing with.
Okay.
Philosophies.
Well, right. Well, very well. Well, those who know the debate would understand what I'm referring to there.
Well,
Well, like, for example, those who operate within science and religion would know what I'm speaking of.
well,
But
compatibilist-
I'll elucidate that very quickly. The incongruity of incompatibilist divine activity, meaning that there's a problem with incompatibilist divine activity. That being the notion that divine action and the natural world are incompatible with one another. I'm speaking there of the incongruency of that position.
All right.
So I deny that the divine cannot influence the world.
Okay,
So that's the incompatibility of the incongruent divine action, meaning that the incongruency of the incompatibility divine action, divine activity,
right.
as I've termed it. Right, and then secondly, the barrenness of reductive micro-level divine activity. That being the barrenness, you could say, in other words, of quantum divine activity. That's what that refers to there, quantum divine activity. Because I view it to be true that quantum divine activity is a reductio ad absurdum, in so much as, sure, according to modern physics, quantum level events fluctuate, and one does not influence the other. So this quantum event over here does not influence this quantum event over here. That would lead to an overburdensome restriction on divine activity. Because if this quantum event does not influence this quantum event, and they both fluctuate independently of one another, that would be a micro level control of action if God were to influence quantum level events. Do you see what I'm saying there? Because it would take constant manipulation for each quantum event, and there are trillions of quantum events, just occur. Actually, I don't even think that's correct. There are. I have to make up terminology just because there's no mathematical word that would express how many times you'd have to control quantum events from second to second.
Could we, I'm just going to seriously ask you, could you take notes and ask him at the end? Because it's disrupting my ability to take in what he's doing. And we did decide quite a while ago, around the time that you joined, that we were going to try not to interrupt in the middle with questions.
Okay.
So just let him finish, John. Take notes. I'm taking notes. I have a million questions. Take notes. You got your computer there.
I begin with the admission of great contingency being everywhere exhibited within the natural biological world. Understanding, therefore, the pervasive character of contingency in our present world, how might God's goals for the natural biological world be realized? The problem can be understood and approached from several perspectival angles, 6 in particular of which I will employ. First, I will expound on the radical evolutionary contingency hypothesis as advocated by the eminent deceased philosopher of biology, Stephen Jay Gould. Second, Gould's accounting of the prevalency of contingency will be counterbalanced by the position of structuralist Michael J. Denton, who stipulates that no matter how many times you rerun the tape of life, or the tape of evolution, most occurrences within it will turn out the same way, essentially. Third, the evolutionary convergence thesis, as set forth by Conway Morris, will be examined that further reiterates the duplicability of our present results in any possible world. Fourth, I will incorporate a conception of divine activity that is expressly driven by the functionalist adaptationist hypothesis as presented by Arthur Peacock, who is my Dr. Walter's Dr. Walter. It's grandparental lineage there, I guess you could say. Fifth, well, it's not his Dr. Walter, but it's one of his serious influences. I'm sorry to go in that derision there. Fifth, I want to draw from Philip Clayton, my Dr. Walter, a pantheistic emergentist metaphysics that will provide the methodology regarding the derivation of complexity within the natural environment. The final scholar, the apex, you could say, of my dissertation that I'll work with is Wesleyan process theologian Thomas J. Ord, whose conception of the uncontrolling love of God will be incorporated and amalgamated into my constructive pantheistic contingentist theology of divine activity or involvement in an evolutionary world, principally with respect to the active and reactive, or succinctly creative, Spirit of God. Hence, I will note that there will be a potent linkage to pneumatology in my dissertation. Now, let me move on to thesis and anticipated conclusions. I propose that my contemporary reconceptioning of Gouldian contingency as one in which the general telos and goal of evolution is increased complexity and the generation of diversity broadly, and more specifically even than that, sentient creatures, is both a plausible and fruitful postulation. I would like to aver that God, that is the ultimate reality, intrinsically delights in both complexity and diversity, in part because the generation of greater complexity allows God to have interaction with complex entities, as well as the production of increased diversity because God lavishes in the multiplicity of diversity and beauty. Further, I maintain that the general telos and goal of evolution is accomplished through the initial pouring out of the Spirit into chaotic, formless matter. That which I have referred to in previous publications, cite McCall 2010 and 2011, as ambibification of matter. I've also noted that this is the result of kenosis, not the kenosis that we ordinarily think of being a self-avowal or self-emptying, but kenosis in the sense of being a pouring out or a self-giving, a filling, an infilling of the other. I've referenced also McCall 2009 and 2011 for this. It continues through the exploration of possible ends via the Spirit of God, and then also through the accompaniment of the Spirit throughout the emergentist process, culminates with the arrival of the evolutionary experiment known as Homo sapiens sapiens, that is, us, who are fully sentient creatures. Indeed, I propose that the most cogent manner in which to picture and perceive divine involvement or activity within the natural world is through the lens of a canonically donated, self-giving, panentheistic contingentist emergentism. Cross-reference McCall 2019 for that. In and through instances of punctuated equilibrium. Cross-reference Gould. Allow me to unpack that sentence a little more. I will be championing herein an idea regarding divine involvement or activity in the world through a creative interplay of contingency and law, as depicted in the historical functionalist versus structuralist debate in evolutionary biology. Cross-reference Gould, Denton, and Conway Morris for this point. This will amount to, in other words, a panentheistic contingentist divine involvement in part through a heavily altered conception of structuralist forms. I do not go all the way with Conway Morris or Denton, who are both more Neoplatonic than I am, but I do see warrant in their positions, in so much as there's some validity to the idea of structuralist forms being present in the world today. I do contend, in my reasoned opinion, on my better days anyway. Second, I deem it true that this divine involvement or activity is brought about or enacted through instantiations of the paleobiological phenomenon known as punctuated equilibrium. Insomuch as divine activity could very well be perceived in and through the instances of the punctuations, as evident in the fossil record, versus the continual and gradual evolution of all things, which is the strict neo-Darwinian view. Third, I posit that the events included under the umbrella of punctuated equilibrium are in fact also instances of the philosophical construct of emergence theory. This is novel. This is new to me. Most of the moves I'm making herein are new, and they're novel for me. They're novel for me to do. This kind of work has not been done yet, which is why I'm excited by it. In this third anticipated conclusion, I draw attention to my contention that divine involvement could also occur through what I term to be panentheistic emergentism. A fourth anticipated conclusion concerns divine involvement or activity being constituted fundamentally by instantiations of uncontrolling kenosis with respect to the ambibified creator, spirit. I am here extending my usage of the term ambibification from a previous publication, the process of which onsets an evolving fertility within the natural world, as well as the panentheistic orientation between God and the world. The panentheistic relationship between God and the natural world was initially wrought by the canonic donation of God's very self into chaotic matter, which, by the way, makes matter. Indeed.
We had our guest evolution.
Yay!
Hey,
I'm sorry, am I late?
you're
You're
late.
here.
You're late, Marlene. 3. Close.
Is it 5 already?
That's okay, you just made everybody in the room happy.
32.
Walking in.
Oh,
30.
yes, we're very late.
Come on, Marlene, come
Hi,
sit down.
Brad.
Okay.
Come on, baby.
Kurt
Did we meet
Smith,
at
who
3
was a
last week?
graduate
okay.
here, wrote a book called.
Yes, we did.
Is that right? Interesting. Yeah, that's cool.
I'm just.
I have a printout. We're okay.
I've lost it.
We're just so
I
glad that
thought,
you're
oh,
here.
I'm early, no one will be here.
All right.
I could look at your text.
Well, at least there's people who are here.
Sure.
Hi, everybody.
Hi. Let me start back over to this paragraph here, if you don't mind.
Sorry.
Just don't realize you just made everybody happy, so
Well,
stop.
I
Yeah,
don't
you did.
know about that, but I apologize profusely, profoundly. I'm so sorry.
Accepted. A fourth anticipated conclusion.
Do you have this printed out, or do you want? Oh, you
No,
have
I
it
just have it on here.
We're working on about page 10, maybe?
Yes,
10? Yeah.
yeah.
I should. Oh, you did? You know? Right. So if you pull up your computer, you can find it therein. I'm going to begin again with that paragraph because I don't know where I was. A fourth anticipated conclusion concerns divine involvement or activity being constituted fundamentally by instantiations of uncontrolling kenosis with respect to the ambivified creator spirit. The term ambivified is also similarly a term that may, coined by myself, that may refer to the result of the ambivification of the Spirit of God into matter, which makes matter matter. Indeed. I'm here extending my usage of the term ambivification from a previous publication, the process of which onsets an evolving fertility within the natural world, as well as the panentheistic orientation between God and the natural world. This panentheistic orientation between God and the world was initially wrought by the canonic donation of God's very self into chaotic matter eons ago, and is now continually sustained and upheld by the repetitive ambivification of the creating spirit, that is, the impartation of her very self into the natural world. Indeed, the term ambivification, I'm going to stumble over that, I know is a word that I've coined to be referent to the descent of the Spirit into matter, which causes the Spirit to be embedded within matter, within nature, and thereby embodied within it as well. Embedded and embodied within nature. The term ambivification then refers to the process by which some entity, something, or someone is imbibed and therefore ambivified by the Spirit of God. Thereafter, marked by the spirit of contingency within evolution, the natural world progressed in a serpentine manner into the advancement of greater complexity, of which Homo sapiens sapiens are the pinnacle, at present anyway. By invoking the terminology of kenosis in this fourth anticipated conclusion, I intend to highlight the inherent self-giving or self-offering, others-centered, and others-empowering love lavishly bestowed upon the natural environment by God. Cross-reference McCall and Ord, around 2008 for this point. The first 3 chapters of this dissertation will be used in order to lay the groundwork for fashioning this multidisciplinary, that is, science, philosophy, and theology project, which will culminate in my own constructive theological argument, the movements of which were sketched out above. I suggest 2 implications based upon an analysis of Gould's contentions regarding radical contingency, Denton and Conway Morris's structuralist revisions to neo-Darwinian theory, and Peacock's functionalist adaptationist stance, along with Clayton's panentheistic emergentism and Ord's uncontrolling love, in relation to what this literature means for those of us who insist upon the existence of God as inescapably marked by relational, a more potent love. First, contingency, oftentimes equitable with the notion of randomness, or that which I'll henceforth and forever have to refer to as randomity, referring to intrinsic and uncontrolling, unaccountable randomness in nature is genuine. God uses this contingency and randomity in order to maximize the filling out of creation through dynamic and complex systems. Second, however, this genuine contingency and randomity does not exclude expressions of similar form, even among widely disparate evolutionary lines. These findings of the expression of similar form, even among and within widely disparate evolutionary lines, strengthen the case that mechanical optimization can drive evolution, as noted by the philosophical strong construct of convergence theory. Cross-reference Conway Morris for this point. Even considering elementary forms of life, the pattern of convergence dominates, suggesting that there is a God of purpose behind it all, wooing and luring and behooving, very process ideas, wooing, luring, and behooving, if you will, the natural world forward in complexity and diversity. In fact, I assert that qualifying physical properties that underlie biological phenomenon could help us recognize when an optimal mechanical solution is likely to drive convergent evolution. Now, would y'all like me to go to the methodology or keep going?
You decide
Well, if
it's helpful to you
Well-
for us to know. We don't care.
It does to me, because it specifies whether his project is how feasible it is.
okay, so
I
you,
guess the only concern would be time. If-
Right.
If you can stay and we can stay, then.
well, I can stay, yeah. I have nothing going.
stay.
Okay. That's good to hear, Marlene.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, we come and go as we are able. That's
Okay.
our rule here. So,
Well, I'll move on to methodology if y'all don't have a problem with
And you have
it.
a
The other
request.
thing too is, in some cases, Robin may correct me, and she's allowed, that instead of like reading the entire paper, you just give a summary of what your methodology is.
Very well, I'll do that. Well, the methodology employed in this project of constructing a pantheistic contingentist account of macroevolution for the late modern world is composed of 6 movements within a quaternity of positions. Allow me to unpack that. First, a broad introduction in which the problem is stated in both the thesis of the project and its anticipated conclusions are given. Second, there will be a rereading of the contingentist Darwinian trajectory within macroevolutionary biology through an assessment of the writings of Gould. Third, another reading, bipolar opposite in orientation, will be provided of the structuralist Darwinian trajectory within macroevolutionary biology, as given by the contributions of Michael J. Denton and Simon Conway Morris. Fourth, there will be a conversation with I'd say probably the of the 20th century groundbreaking theologian of science, Arthur Peacock. Fifth, there'll be a dialogue between I and the foremost theologian of science today in the academy, Philip Clayton. And I say that not because I'm a student, I say that because this is empirically true. Indeed.
it's okay. We say that stuff about Ingolf all the time.
Right,
So go for it.
Right. Indeed. With regard to how emergently contingent data from the biological sciences affect this proposal. And sixth, a distinctly constructive theological appropriation of uncontrolling kenosis, which is my terminology. Uncontrolling kenosis based upon the position of the contemporary process, Wesleyan theologian Thomas J. Ord. And I'll say here as in passing, it takes a hell of a man to study under for him to agree not to be the pinnacle of your dissertation. You know, right? Does that make sense to you?
You're talking about Clayton.
I'm talking about Clayton, right? I went to Clayton and I was like, well, you know, Philip, or Phil as I affectionately call him, said, I respect greatly your work, but I don't foresee my dissertation reaching its apex with you. And he said, hey, don't worry about that. Just do it the way you want to do it and fit me in. And I said, okay, well, you're going to be there. Indeed, you are. You and one of your Dr. Vaughters, but nevertheless, the apex is reached. I contend with Thomas J. Ord, and he was cool with that. It takes a big man to allow that, right? But anyway, that's the side there. Throughout this process, a pneumatological via Amos Young and canonic assist, my terminology, will be explored by and through which a pantheistic contingentist account of macroevolution is provided that places the evolutionary epoch within the domain of the canonic spirit. Again, my terminology. The three main divisions of this dissertation at the meta level are signified by beginning with the scholar of evolutionary biology, then proceeding through an exploration of scholars in evolutionary biology and theology, and then ending up at a purely theological end, you could say, a theological position at the end. These movements correspond broadly to the Roman numerals in the outline that will follow this section, and also reflect my desire to arrive at a distinctly theological position by the end of my work. After all, I hope to add to the constructive interface of systematic theology in conversation with a robust pneumatological creation, if I may use such a loaded word. Ingolf, by the way, as an aside, critiqued me on my use of creation because he thought it was inconsistent with my uses of the natural world earlier. So I've taken into account his critiques, and I parenthetically included that, if I may use such a loaded word, just to reflect back to his critique of my previous proposal. Herein, I will implicitly employ the multidisciplinary methodology displayed by the foremost theologian of science today, Phil Clayton, thereby bringing an adaptively based and emergentist-centered philosophy to interpret the data points of evolution that we encounter herein. Secondly, this project will unabashedly further display a Christian orientation, since I have been considerably molded by the Wesleyan Arminian relational theological tradition. As such, this dissertation will unapologetically reflect that lineal descendants with the intent of also contributing to it. In view of such, this project will be colored, invariably so, by Wesleyan views of God and the God-world-human relationship, which serves to ground the endeavor firmly within the Christian tradition. However, the intended audience of this dissertation goes beyond Christianity, beyond the segment of Christianity that I'm writing from, to the church ecumenical. More specifically, this dissertation will, third, be devoted to theologically exploring macroevolution within the context of evolutionary biology, which will function to ground this work within the broad Darwinian trajectory. Now, I must notice an aside here, recognizing that my former training in biology and as well as my practical experiences at a biotech firm for a couple of years have significantly shaped me, this project will assuredly reflect a stout scientific position or perspective. Although, to reiterate, I am dialoguing with evolutionary sciences, evolutionary biology, in order to make more robust my theological claims. I hope you understand what I mean by that. I'm not dialoguing with evolutionary biology merely to do it. I'm using evolutionary biology. I'm using the massive dialogue with evolutionary biology in order to say, well then, so then this, theologically, indeed. Related to that notion, I need to acknowledge that my naturalistic bent and thereafter bridle it so that it may not consume the constructive portion of my venture. I project that my disposition toward the evolutionary sciences will be evident in me ceding more to them than what other scholars, maybe even from my own tradition, might like. Fourth, my methodology will also employ the multidisciplinary approach of the pneumatological imagination, which describes humanity's dynamic epistemological nature that is open to and informed by God's Spirit, which is espoused by Amos Young, my previous doctoral advisor. So He
really interesting.
he is, indeed he is. I agree. As espoused by Amos Young in his Spirit Word Community text, who is one of, if not the foremost Christian systematic theologian in the academy today. Anyone who knows of his voluminous writings will attest to that. The man is a machine. He is always putting out something.
I hate them.
Indeed.
Following in his footsteps.
Indeed.
You are following in their
You're
footsteps.
32 or 33.
We find it disgusting, but you are doing it.
I'm trying to. He taught me that. He said, "Publish or perish, Bradford. Publish or perish." So be it. Young suggests therein that late modern theology cannot be divorced from a person's system living. Probably chopped that up there, but so be it. System living. And thus only a comprehensive method can provide an adequate foundation for human situatedness within the world. He notes, in fact, that a hermeneutics of the divine that fails to properly account for the interpretation of the extra-scriptural world will ultimately sabotage the theological task, regardless of how polished one's biblical hermeneutics may be or is. Therefore, my friends, biblical hermeneutics cannot be the sole feature of one's theological methodology. From discourse with Young, I maintain that the Spirit of God is at work in countless forms, in countless manners, and in countless guises throughout the natural world. I will suggest that this pneumatological imagination adds significant vigor to my overall reimagining of divine activity, or as I previously referred to it, divine involvement, in the contemporary context. Once an uncontrolling panentheistic contingentist understanding of divine involvement in an evolutionary world has been proposed and expounded upon, its practical implications will then be examined. Now, I do this for a couple of reasons, but primarily because I view it to be true that the practical implications of any position must be expounded upon in order for it to be worthwhile. Because we need to have some sort of practicality from anything. So then, what does this mean? We can't maintain our pontificating merely on a theoretical level. We've got to flesh it out and let other people understand. Because so oftentimes, if we don't flesh it out ourselves, they won't understand it at all, because they don't have the the background knowledge that we have of writing about it. Indeed. As such, a panentheistic contingentist theology of divine activity must not only be capable of dealing with the issue of contingency in law on the theoretical level, but I propose that any theology of divine activity or involvement is largely impotent if it cannot augment the late modern understanding of reality. I look to make that explicit in the implications section, which I did not elaborate upon here. I will close here by just merely going over my outline and not going in detail, but just going over the synopsis of the positions of Gould, Denton, Conway Morris, and of course Peacock and Clayton. And those are the main people in my dissertation committee, or in my dissertation itself, I should say. Now, synopsis of Gouldian contingency. In defending and expanding Darwin's theory, Gould posits that Darwinism is a two-part series of contingency and conventional causality, that is, chance and necessity. Cross-reference Jacques.
I'm sorry, I'm not looking at that right now.
Jacques Monod. Jacques, there we go. Very well. See, I mutilate these. I'm from South Georgia. Please forgive me. I mutilate them.
We're here for you. We love correcting your foreign pronunciation.
Gotcha.
It's fun.
Yeah. Now, contingency rules the day, but because there are infinite galaxies for the complexification of matter to occur within, our galaxy just happened to stumble upon it. Very well. That's a significant statement. Contingency is the tendency of complex systems with substantial stochastic components and intricate nonlinear interactions among components to be unpredictable in principle from a full knowledge of antecedent conditions. but fully explainable in reverse. Okay? We may not be able to predict it because it's contingent upon randomness and randomity, as I've termed it, but we can explain it in reverse, as the scientific method does so clearly in all of its instances. In sum, according to Gould, in a major revision of Darwinian logic, chance has been elevated from its traditional and restricted role as a generator of raw material only to a more active part as agent of evolutionary change, making it thereby an important evolutionary agent of change in both the qualitative and quantitative sense. Moving on to Gould in dialogue with his opponents, Michael Denton specifically. Synopsis of position. Before Darwin, most biologists adhered to a Platonic model of nature, a position of which implied that the biological realm consisted of a finite set of essentially immutable natural forms that are an intrinsic part of the eternal nature of the world. Pre-Darwinian biologists therefore sought to account for the origin of biological form in terms of set generative physical laws, often referred to as laws of form. Recent advances in evolutionary biology even suggest that some biological forms are in fact determined by physical laws. Denton stipulates, therefore, that they appear to be invariant Platonic forms of precisely the type that pre-Darwinian biologists were seeking. This resurgence of Platonic forms means that physical laws must have had a far greater role in the evolution of biological form than is generally assumed. Now, for Denton, this also means a return to pre-Darwinian conceptions of the diversity of life as a finite set of natural forms that will recur over and over again anywhere in the cosmos where carbon-based life exists. Let me move on to Conway Morris here quickly as quick synopsis. In response to Gould, the main protagonist in my dissertation, Conway Morris retorts, such a view, with its emphasis upon chance and accident, obscures the reality of evolutionary convergence. Given certain environmental forces, life will shape itself to adapt. History is constrained, and not in all things are possible. That's in clear opposition to Gould, the main guy in my dissertation. That's why I'm contrasting Gould and Denton with the positions of Gould, because they're essentially bipolar opposites of one another. Indeed. The basic idea behind convergent evolution is that disparate lineages are exposed to similar environmental pressures and respond in similar ways to fill the available niche, which thereby leads to similar phenotypes. We note here that the niches, according to Conway Morris, pre-exist the organism, and the organism grows into that niche, that role, that area, you could say, in nature, and then thereby similar form is expressed. That's a little different than what you would think would be a normal Neoplatonic viewpoint, which would say that the niches pre-exist and the forms also pre-exist, right? And the two merely grow into one another because that's what they're deemed possible. That's what's deemed possible to do. Now, Conway Morris's four conclusions from this data set are: first, what is regarded as complex is inherent in simpler systems more often than not. Second, evolutionary endpoints are limited in number, meaning that not everything is possible. Third, what is in fact possible has typically been arrived at numerous times. And finally, all the aforementioned points take much time to transpire, that is billions of years, billions of years. And within the period of billions of years, even the most unseemly occurrence becomes almost an inevitability.
Stop. Grant's packing up, and we do usually...
I'll stop here then.
No, don't stop. But I just want to say, I'm not sure you have anything, but if he has even one question for you, you don't wanna miss out.
Sure.
I mean, anything he has, you want, believe me.
No, we should get together sometime maybe or talk, because I have about 4 pages of questions. So,
Gotcha.
yeah, I actually just frankly don't understand very much of this at all. So, but I'll start with the second law of thermodynamics, and we'll talk about that sometime.
Okay.
That's my favorite law. It's the only one I
That's why
obey.
I was late today.
That's right, that's right.
No, I'm just teasing you, but I am,
No.
I wonder about that. But anyway.
He's brilliant and you want anything he has to say.
Yeah.
Sure. Well, email me and we can set up a time to go to the
Yeah, we should do.
whatever that is.
I like that. Yes.
Hagelbargers?
Hagelburgers, right? Hagelburgers. Right. I'd love that. I'd appreciate that, Grant. I'd love your comments.
We are,
There's
we're
gonna
planning
be
to put
3
the
now, so
push
let's have
on you to
the
present next
American
week,
Idol.
Marlene. But
Gotcha.
you can say
Gotcha.
that, but that's.
Saying the last part of his
He said that
dissertation.
Yeah.
as
you
well
were
to
gonna
us.
ask you if you wanted to, what it was.
It's got about.
Anything
Yeah.
as extensive as that.
No, I like,
Or-
I think I'd rather put it off.
That's fine.
Till the time after, or, cause I'm gathering myself together out of this chaos.
So that means it's either me or Sophia.
Okay, I haven't spoken to
I mean,
Sophia about it, but,
I can just talk about what I'm doing, but I think we want something a little more structured.
Do you?
well, that hasn't stopped me.
And stop to.
I'm going to find the book that I got out of the trash.
You found the trash?
Yeah, remember last week I
Her
was
trash
in
story.
the
What book
library I
is it?
used to work at, the Foundations of Arithmetic, the bilingual edition.
That's hilarious.
And my husband saw me reading this, he said, why are you reading that? You're supposed to be doing why are you reading math? I said, look, it is philosophy.
This was like 20 years ago.
No, this was last
The other
week,
day.
after we met. And so I looked on Amazon,
That's
and
hilarious.
this book,
Yeah.
they had a picture of this book
Yeah.
beat up just like this one, $800.
And she's going to give it to you
I
now,
wish I
Grant.
could get it
God.
cheaper,
Yeah,
but
I bought one
this is
copy.
one of my favorite books, and I don't know why.
I bought Lemon's copy, famous logician Lemon, who came to
Oh.
Claremont for a couple of years. At
This edition?
That edition, there's only one edition, at the,
Oh, I
of
didn't
the
know that.
Austin translation. But I bought it at the thrift store down, I found it at a thrift store down on Foothill. And there's A.J.
Wow.
Lemon.
Oh, my word.
And it was probably just a few bucks.
$2 or so.
That's
Well,
oh my God.
Yeah, that's quite
Anyway,
a coincidence.
I had to
Yeah,
I brought
but
this
I bought a
for you.
second copy, just because,
I like that book.
you know,
Yeah.
you can get it.
Got 3 short paragraphs to go, and then we'll be
Okay.
done.
No,
Sorry about that.
we're ready to listen to you.
Yeah.
I just knew that Grant was leaving and
Sure,
I didn't want him to leave without us just having a little stop for a
I'm
minute.
sorry, yes.
No, no,
We'll
no.
miss you next week.
Not-
Oh, you're not coming next week, Grant?
No, I have a workshop to attend.
Okay, okay.
Thank you for sitting here and sticking through this, and thank you in advance for giving me the time you're going to give me at Hagelburgers. How about that? I'll treat you. Thank,
Yeah, we'll just meet sometime. Yes, no.
excellent.
Thank you.
Bye, Grant. Okay,
Now-
keep going, Brad.
I would like to give a short synopsis of the position of Arthur Peacock, and this is I'm wrapping it up here. Peacock stipulates that the interplay between contingency, that is chance, and law, that is necessity, is productive of much evolutionary advancement. If one strays too far on the side of law, a rigid nothingness would result, meaning that there would be no change in the positive with regard to complexity. If one strays too far, rather, on the chance side, or the randomity side, as I've termed it earlier, a proverbial anarchy would result, and all complexity would be washed out by further chance or contingency. While Peacock does not think that chaos theory or quantum divine activity is plausible as a producer of complexity and change in evolution, he does in fact contend that divine purposes or activity could be enacted in nature by whole part constraint, which is a virtual top-down modality. In sum, contingency, that is chance, is productive of variation and can be harnessed for the furtherance of complexity within evolution. Now, here's my big eye. Philip Clayton, my Dr. Vater. For Clayton, as a consequence of divine limitation, divine self-limitation, only indeterministic chance provides an avenue for divine activity. But contingency itself pertains to every feature of the world. As such, quantum events offer promise for divine involvement because they are intrinsically indeterminable. Probabilistic laws, then, leave some room for the interplay of chance and physical law. Stronger, contingency marks the created ex nihilo world, and this contingency pertains to every feature of the world. God, however, is not contingent but necessary, not mortal but eternal, not finite but infinite. As such, God serves as the ground of the world, a la Tillich.
I was just thinking, I was like, that's not like telling.
And in turn, must be understood as, and the world in turn must be understood as grounded in God. Thus, God is the condition and possibility of all contingent things. The causal powers of particles and forces are not external to God. Hence, their causal powers are still ultimately modes of divine activity. Indeed, for the pantheistic emergentist Clayton, which is my terminology again, every activity, because it takes place within God, is in some sense a divine action, and hence within the activity of God. Now, this is where my dissertation apexes with Thomas J. Ord. In the uncontrolling love of God, Ord notes that the oscillation of divine causation does not mean that God chooses sometimes to be more influential and other times to remain relatively uninfluential. Instead, God's nature as love prompts God to exert the most influence possible in any given situation. Ord notes that randomness, accidents, and chance, that is contingency, reliably describe the character of at least some events in life. In other words, contingency characterizes existence at least sometimes, or at least to some extent. The spontaneity inherent in existence generates chance and contingency, which plays a part in producing splendor and wonder. In fact, chance and contingency, operating within long-like regularities, make possible new and creative forms of life and ways of living in our world. As a process thinker, note that he studied under the distinguished David Ray Griffin here at CST. He's actually an alumnus of CGU. Ord is, he took part of the fertility between CGU and CST. You know,
So many have.
right,
They're enrolled here, but they did everything over there.
right. But Ord focuses upon interactive relationality and other philosophical themes, such as the emphasis upon activity over substance, wholeness, totality over bifurcations, innovation, novelty over continuity, creativity over stasis, change over persistence, and the contention that process is the principal category of ontological description. That's it. Sorry to bore
I
you.
understand process theology. You just explained it to me in that
In a
last
capsule.
sentence.
In a capsule.
I get it. Michael.
All right then.